Legos too? Because I think some of them would really like them. Yeah, maybe. Okay. Awesome. Okay. We won't judge you if you want the Legos. If you go back and grab it. It's slow in the sermon already. So. Well, welcome. We are, as Brittany has alluded, we are in the third week now of a sermon series on 1 Peter. The series is entitled Living Hope for a Dying World. We are up to 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 4 through 10. Let's listen for God's word. Come to him, a living stone, though rejected by mortals, yet chosen and precious in God's sight. And like living stones, let yourselves be built into a spiritual house, to be a holy priesthood, to offer sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. For it stands in Scripture saying, Behold, I am laying in Zion a stone, a cornerstone, chosen and precious, and whoever believes in him will not be put to shame. To you then who believe, he is precious. But for those who do not believe, the stone that the builders rejected has become the very head of the corner, and a stone that makes them stumble, and a rock that makes them fall. They stumble because they disobey the word, as they were destined to. But you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's own people, in order that you might proclaim the mighty deeds and acts of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. Once you were not a people, but now you are God's people. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Well, many years ago, in a land far away, there was a tribe of nomadic people that worshiped the one true God. These people were shepherds and herders who lived in tents and were at peace with all of the people around them. But their hearts were troubled because their neighbors, though they were at peace with them, did not believe in the one true God. Instead, they worshipped idols, carved images of wood and stone, and this grieved the people deeply. They told their neighbors about the love and about the justice of the one true God, but their neighbors just laughed at them, saying, "You worship an invisible God who is not really there. Our gods are right here before us. We take them with us wherever we need them and wherever we go, and we can see them and we can pray to them whenever we need to." People of the one true God tried to make their neighbors see that the one true God couldn't be fashioned into an image, for he was far more glorious than even the most glorious thing on earth. The one true God, they said, was like pure light, and he called all people to leave their darkness and their ignorance and enter into his glorious light. God loved all people dearly, they explained, and God desired only that they love him and that they love one another in return. But their neighbors stumbled over these words, and they chose the comfort of things that can be seen and can be touched over the hope of things invisible and untouchable. And so the people of the one true God prayed, and they asked that God would show them a way that they could reach the people around them. How could they make them understand how wonderful and how glorious the one true God really was? One day, a young man came forward with an idea. Perhaps, he said, they could build a temple, a marvelous house of worship, which would convince their neighbors of the glories of the one true God and move them to worship God with them. All of the people agreed that this was an excellent idea, and so they set out to build. And yet there were obstacles everywhere. They were a small tribe, for instance, and they didn't have money to pay others to build for them. And as a nomadic people, they didn't have much experience in construction. so they selected their 3 best builders, and they sent them out to study the great temples of the earth and learn from experienced builders. The 3 left the hill country, and they went out into the world. They went to Egypt and they saw the great pyramids. They went to Babylon and they saw the ziggurats with their heads, their temples that seemed to reach the heavens themselves. They went to Asia and they saw the temples of Angkor, buildings too great and too marvelous for them to ever hope to build. And although they learned much, they returned home greatly discouraged, doubting if they would ever be able to build a great temple. Then one day, a wild-looking man came into their village. He was a prophet who lived in the desert, eating only what the one true God gave him. He told the people that the one true God had heard their prayers, and that he would send them a master builder who would instruct them and help them to build a great spiritual house of worship. The building would be beautiful and it would be built with great sacrifice, he said, and the people rejoiced at this good, hopeful news. The following week, the people of the one true God stopped every caravan that passed by, looking for the one that God had promised to send. Indeed, they found many rich and powerful men and women. They met many learned and experienced builders, and yet none of them seemed to be the one that was sent by the one true God. Again, they became discouraged, and they began to wonder if the desert prophet had been confused, or if he had been deranged by the heat and by the sun. Where, they thought, where is this master builder that had been promised them? They felt a lot like the churches in the scriptures that we read today. God seemed nowhere in sight for them also, and they too were beginning to lose hope, beginning to believe that God had forgotten them, and that they were destined to live forever in darkness and in shame. But then, one day, a wandering shepherd came to their village to water his flocks. As was the custom of the desert people, they invited him to join them and spend the night. Over dinner, the shepherd listened intently to the story of the people and their desire to build a spiritual house, to be a witness to all of those around them. They told him of the prophecy of the master builder that would help them build the temple. And he heard the sadness in their voice as they explained that they could not find this master builder anywhere despite their search. After hearing their story, the shepherd was deeply moved because he too had been rejected by others and felt like an alien and an exile in the land. And so he decided to stay with the people because they were hospitable and because he too worshiped the one true God. Well, over the next several weeks, the shepherd told the people many things that they had never heard about the one true God. It seemed that the shepherd was on especially intimate terms with the one true God, and he would pray and he would sing in strange and yet marvelous ways that would warm their hearts. Somehow they knew that this shepherd was sent by God. One evening, the shepherd surprised them all by saying that he too wanted to build a great house of worship to the one true God. He wanted to help them, and if they would follow his instructions, he would help them build the greatest temple that had ever been seen on earth, and it would draw people to God. Some of the people welcomed the stranger's help, but others wanted to wait for the one who was to be sent by the one true God. At this, the shepherd bowed his head and he said, "I am he." The next day, the shepherd took the people up to a high place near their camp. As they gathered, he said to them, "This is the mountain of the one true God. This is the place where we will build God's temple. It will be great, and people will come from east and west and north and south to worship the one true God here. I have chosen you to build this glorious temple, and we will be a royal priesthood. We will be a holy nation together." The people were very excited at this news. But they said to the shepherd, well, how will this be built? We have no stones, and the quarry is far from here. We are unskilled, and we cannot pay others to do the work for us. How will this glorious temple be built, they asked. If you follow me, and if you do as I do, the shepherd said, the holy temple will be built. And people will come, and they will worship the one true God. Having said this, the shepherd knelt on the ground and lay prostrate before the people. He lay, and he lay there. He lay still for so long that the people thought that he had died. But then after a while, he began to sing, just as he had done before. His song was beautiful, and his song was powerful, almost unearthly, in fact. It was as if the heavens themselves were opened up, and the people's spirits were lifted out of their darkness and into the glorious light of God. Then an even more strange and an even more mysterious thing happened. As the shepherd sang, his body began to change. He became thicker and squarer. His arms and his legs joined together, and his body became an exquisitely formed and perfectly dressed stone, dazzling white in the sunlight. And yet the echo of his song could still be heard resounding throughout the hills. As you can imagine, many people were alarmed, and they drew back. Many feared for their lives, and they hugged their children to their side. But some were curious and went up and touched the stone carefully. It was warm and it was smooth to the touch, not like any other stone they had ever seen their entire lives. It was as though the shepherd was still alive within it. It was large and it was perfectly square. It would make, in fact, an ideal cornerstone, they thought to themselves. But how would the people get more like it, they thought? No quarry on earth was capable of constructing a stone such as this, even at great cost. And yet again, the people began to despair. But then, 12 mighty men who were especially close to the shepherd had a revelation. He does not wish us to build the house of worship, they said. He wishes us to be the house of worship. And at that, they knelt down beside the cornerstone, and they too began to sing. Miraculously, like the shepherd before them, they too became strong, well-shaped stones, and they formed the foundation of a glorious temple. Yet again, the people drew back in fear. Were they to lose their lives and become merely a stone, an inanimate object, in a part of a cold stone wall? But soon, other men and women who loved the shepherd stepped forward and said, if it is truly our desire to call others to worship the one true God, then there is no expense, there is no cost too great to build this house of worship. And they too laid down their lives and let themselves be built into this great spiritual temple. The people were afraid yet again. How would the temple be built, and how would its form take shape now that the master builder was no longer with them? He could no longer communicate to them in the way that they were accustomed to. But then they remembered that some among their community had carefully written down the things that the 12 mighty men had learned from the master builder, his most important teaching, his most valuable stories. These sacred writings, they thought, these sacred writings could serve as blueprints for the shepherd's temple. And so, one by one, over the years, they laid down their lives as they were directed by the sacred writings. And the temple continued to grow and to thrive. Friends and relatives, men, women, and children joined hands, locked arms, and sang together the songs of praise of the one true God. Later, one of their neighboring tribes was traveling past, and they saw the empty tents of the people who worship the one true God. Their pots and pans and clothing lying scattered about by the wind, possessions with no one there to possess them. And then they looked up on the hill, and they saw a wonderful temple. They approached it with fear and with awe. The building was like none that they had ever seen in their whole lives. Its stones were smooth, and yet there was no mark on them from a stone cutter. Their surface was smooth, but it wasn't cold. It was warm, and it was inviting as no other temple they had ever seen. As the intensity of the place overwhelmed them, and as the Spirit of the one true God overwhelmed them, they too knelt down and worshipped the Lord. And so the temple grew, and it grew, and it grew. Sadly, over time, the temple lost much of its perfection. Sometimes storms outside would shake it violently. Sometimes the people would begin to doubt, and they would lose their grip on their neighbor's hand. But each time that happened, the one true God would send a new prophet to the people. And he would or she would remind the people of the master builder's teachings, and together they would repair the temple and make it glorious again. Still today, in fact, the temple's foundation is firm, and those who look up can see her standing like a city set upon a hill. The temple now covers the face of the whole earth, and those who listen carefully can still hear the song of the master builder resounding within her walls. If you listen carefully, perhaps you can hear it still too. The tune goes like this: "Come to me, a living stone, rejected by mortals, yet chosen and precious in God's sight. And like living stones, let yourselves be built into a spiritual house, so that you will be a holy priesthood, offering spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God." And so, to this day, people still come from east and west and north and south, and they sit at table to worship in this holy temple. And some people, those that love the shepherd, still lay down their lives, their time, their talent, and their treasure, and they become living stones in the master builder's temple also. Thanks be to the one true God. I would invite you to stand. We're going to sing.